On March 13, 1962, the most senior military commanders in the United States put a document in front of the Secretary of Defense. That document proposed blowing up American planes, killing American civilians, and staging terrorist attacks on U.S. soil, then blaming it all on Cuba. This plan was real. It was signed, it was approved, and the only reason it never happened is one man said no. Here's the full story.
This was a struggle of Cuban patriots against a Cuban dictator.
It's 1962 and the United States has a problem. Cuba. Fidel Castro took power in 1959, threw out the American-friendly dictator, nationalized all the industries that American businesses had been getting rich off for decades, and aligned himself with the Soviet Union. Communism was now 90 miles from Florida. The CIA tried to fix this. They recruited 1,500 Cuban exiles, trained them in Guatemala, and sent them to invade Cuba in April 1961. It was a complete disaster. Castro found out, met the invaders on the beach, and defeated them in 3 days. The plan that everyone called the Bay of Pigs became one of the most embarrassing failures in American military history. JFK fired the CIA director, but the Cuba problem was still there, and the military was getting desperate. They needed a new plan. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military authority in the country, got to work. What they came up with was something that, if you read it today, genuinely makes you stop and reread it, because it was a plan to murder Americans.
And here's what that document actually said. Not what someone claims it said, not a theory, the actual words. Because this document was declassified in 1997 and you can download it from the National Archives right now. 15 pages, real signatures. And the proposals inside it are extraordinary.
The document is called Operation Northwoods, written by General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, submitted on March 13, 1962 to the Secretary of Defense for the President's approval. And here is what it proposes. A communist Cuban terror campaign in Miami and other Florida cities and even in Washington. Real explosions, real victims, staged by Americans, blamed on Cuba, sinking boats carrying Cuban refugees, real people, drowned on the open ocean, to generate public outrage against Castro, staging fake funerals for mock victims of Cuban terrorism, blowing up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay, and blaming Cuba. The document specifically calls this a "Remember the Main Incident," referencing the 1898 explosion that triggered the Spanish-American War. The generals knew that explosion was probably accidental. They were proposing to do something similar on purpose. And then the plan gets to the airplanes. A real civilian flight departs a U.S. airport with real passengers. At some point, without anyone knowing, the real plane quietly lands at a military base. The passengers are hidden in a classified program. A drone, an identical aircraft with no one on board, continues the flight over Cuba. And then it gets shot down. The world sees an American civilian plane falling out of the sky over Cuban territory, and Cuba gets blamed for murdering people who were never actually on that plane.
So let's be precise about what that means. Real American citizens board a plane. They go through security, they find their seats, they have no idea what's happening. And the plan is to secretly take them off that plane, hide them at a military base, and use a drone to fake their deaths, to start a war. These are words from a U.S. government document, signed, dated, and it keeps going.
The document goes further. It proposes that American military personnel dress in Cuban military uniforms and attack the U.S. base at Guantanamo. Americans attacking Americans dressed as Cubans, so the attack can be blamed on Cuba. It suggests staging the assassination of Cuban immigrants living in the United States. Real people killed, blamed on Cuban secret agents. It proposes that an American military pilot flying a U.S. Air Force plane could be reported as shot down by a Cuban MiG, when in reality the aircraft would simply be destroyed by other means and the pilot would disappear into a classified program. The document says, and this is a direct quote, that we could go to the extent of wounding people and then making fake arrests with prepared documents. Read that again. The United States military was proposing to wound its own citizens on American soil, then fake arrest people to explain the wounds so the newspapers would report on it. The document actually predicts this would cause what it calls a helpful wave of national indignation. These are not the words of extremists. This is bureaucratic professional language written in well-lit offices in the Pentagon by men who went to church on Sundays and came home to their families at night, and they were writing proposals to murder Americans.
Now, here's the part that historians are still arguing about today, because this document landed on the desk of the President of the United States. Kennedy read it, and what he did next, and what happened to Kennedy 18 months later, raises questions that have never been fully answered.
Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara received Operation Northwoods from Lemnitzer on March 13, 1962. McNamara rejected it immediately and passed it to Kennedy. Kennedy was furious. The relationship between Kennedy and the Joint Chiefs, already wrecked by the Bay of Pigs, never recovered. Kennedy believed the military was pushing him toward a war he didn't want. He had served in World War II as a naval officer. He had watched men die. He knew what war actually cost. He quietly removed Lemnitzer as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, reassigning him to NATO in Europe. He never told the public what Lemnitzer had proposed, he just moved him out. In the months that followed, Kennedy moved American foreign policy in a different direction, back-channel communications with Khrushchev, exploring a negotiated settlement with Cuba, restricting CIA covert operations. The generals saw this as weakness. They saw Kennedy as the obstacle. On November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Kennedy was shot and killed. We are not saying the Joint Chiefs pulled the trigger. We are saying this: the men who wrote a plan to murder Americans to start a war were still in positions of power when the one man who stopped them was assassinated. Those are documented facts. What you conclude from them is your decision.
Operation Northwoods was classified for 35 years. When it was finally declassified in 1997, almost nobody covered it. And here's why that timing matters. Congress declassified this document as part of the official JFK assassination investigation. They decided a plan to murder Americans in false flag operations was relevant context for understanding who might have wanted Kennedy dead. Then, 6 months after the first major journalist wrote about it, September 11th happened, and Northwoods disappeared.
The documents were declassified in 1997 and 1998 under the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act. Journalist James Bamford wrote about them in his 2001 book, Body of Secrets. He called Northwoods the most corrupt plan ever created by the U.S. government. The book came out in April 2001. Mainstream newspapers covered it. For a few weeks, people were genuinely disturbed. Then, September 11th happened 5 months later, and in the political climate that followed, discussing false flag operations became essentially impossible without being called a conspiracy theorist. The actual documented conspiracy by the actual US government quietly disappeared from public conversation. The document is still there. It has always been there. 15 pages, real signatures, available to download right now from the National Archives. Most Americans have never heard of it, and that might be the most remarkable thing about Operation Northwoods. The conspiracy is real, documented, and government confirmed, and somehow that makes it easier to ignore, not harder.
And here's what I want you to sit with. Operation Northwoods wasn't a rogue general going off script. It went through official channels. It was reviewed by multiple senior officials. It was formally submitted to the Secretary of Defense. The entire U.S. military chain of command signed off on murdering Americans. One president said no. That president was killed 18 months later. And his successor used a different fabricated attack to start a different war.
In August 1964, President Lyndon Johnson went on national television and told Americans that U.S. Navy ships had been attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. He used this attack to push the Gulf of Tonkin resolution through Congress, giving him essentially unlimited authority to escalate in Vietnam. 58,000 Americans died in that war. The attack almost certainly never happened. The second Gulf of Tonkin incident, the one that actually triggered the resolution, was later shown by declassified NSA documents to have been based on misinterpreted radar data and sailors firing at shadows in the dark. Robert McNamara, the same man who rejected Operation Northwoods, later admitted the second attack almost certainly did not occur. The template the Northwoods authors proposed, stage a fake attack on Americans and use it to start a war, was not used against Cuba, but something remarkably similar was used to send 58,000 Americans to die in Southeast Asia. Operation Northwoods did not succeed, but the thinking behind it did.
So here's where this lands. The political and military machine that produced Operation Northwoods is still running. Same structure, same logic, same incentives. Kennedy rejected it. Kennedy died. His successor used a different fabricated attack to start a different war. The document proving all of this has been in the National Archives since 1997. This is not a theory. This is just history.
Operation Northwoods was not an isolated moment. The Tuskegee syphilis experiments ran from 1930. The government deliberately withheld treatment from black men infected with syphilis to study the disease's progression. They watched men go blind, go insane, and die. For 40 years, MK-Ultra, the CIA secretly administered LSD and other drugs to Americans without their knowledge. Operation Sea Spray in 1950, the U.S. Navy sprayed biological agents over San Francisco to test how a bioweapon might spread through an urban population. Residents developed unusual infections. The Navy said nothing for decades. Each of these programs followed the same pattern: classified until documents made denial impossible, denied until those documents were released. Operation Northwoods fits perfectly. The only difference is Kennedy stopped it before anyone died. The Joint Chiefs asked for permission. Kennedy said no. The question that has never been answered is how many proposals like Northwoods were never rejected, how many were implemented, how many are still classified, how many are sitting in a vault right now waiting for the right president to say yes.
The document is real. You can download it from the National Archives right now and read every single word. If you enjoyed this video, a like and subscribe means everything. It's the best way to support the channel. The next story is just as crazy. Thanks for watching.